Chapter 1: Childhood and Early Years. Outwardly, blessed Starets Silouan's life presents little of interest. Up until the time of his military service, he lived like any other poor Russian peasant. Then came the usual period as an ordinary soldier in an army, followed by long years, 46 in all, of monotonous existence of a simple monk in a community. The monastery register says of him, Schema monk Father Silouan, name in the world, Simeon, peasant from the province of Tambov, district of Ledonisk, village of Skovsk. Born 1866, arrived Athos 1892. Professed 1896. Schema 1911. Performed his duty of obedience at the mill at Kalmar at Old Rusikon as a steward. Died September 11th, 1938. From born to died, how meager the picture. Of his exterior life there is nothing to tell, while to touch upon the man's inner life before God may well be prying and indelicate, and to make public the depth of a Christian heart almost sacrilege. Yet, in the belief that nothing can now dismay the Starets who left the world victorious over it, that nothing can now disturb his eternal rest in God, I shall try to relate something of his spiritual biography, so rich and sublime, for those few who themselves are drawn to the same divine life. The battleground of the spiritual struggle is first and foremost man's own heart. And he would explore his own heart and appreciate the prophet's David reflection that the heart is deep. The real life of the Christian is lived deep in his heart, hidden not only from alien eyes, but also in his fullness from the owner of the heart himself. He who enters these secret recesses finds himself face to face with the mystery of being. Anyone has ever given himself over with a pure heart to contemplation of his inner self knows how impossible it is to detect spiritual processes of the heart. Because in its profundity, the heart touches upon the state of being where there is no processes. But now, in writing this profile, I find myself faced with such a task, portraying the evolution of a great ascetic striver. No, I will not set myself on an impossible assignment, but just to touch upon those stages of the Starets' life which I am familiar. And to still a greater degree, I consider that any attempt at scientific psychoanalysis would be out of place. For where God operates, science is not opposite. Of the Starets' long life, I have retained certain facts in my mind which reveal something of his inner progress and at the same time are part of his history. The first of these go back to his early childhood, when he was not more than 4 years old. Like many Russian peasants, his father always had welcome for wandering pilgrims. One feast day, with especial pleasure, he invited a book peddler to his home, hoping to learn something new and interesting. He was irked by his own illiteracy and longed for knowledge. While his guest was given food and drink, young Simeon examined him with a child's curiosity and listened attentively to his talk. The peddler argued that Christ was not God. Indeed, that God didn't exist at all. His words, "Where is this God of yours, then?" particularly impressed little Simeon, who thought to himself, "When I grow up, I shall go all over the world looking for God." As soon as his guest had departed, he said to his father, "You make me say my prayers, but he says there isn't a God." To which Simeon's father replied, "I thought he was a wise man, but he turned out to be a fool. Don't take any notice of what he said." But the seed of uncertainty had been sown. Incredibly relatable in most Christian walks, the seed of uncertainty. That's something I have certainly experienced. Years passed. Simeon grew into a sturdy lad, enjoyed the artel, working on Prince Trubetskoy's estate not far from the village. His elder brother was a four-man builder, Simeon a carpenter. The old countrywoman who cooked for the artel went on a pilgrimage and visited the tomb of a remarkable hermit, John Sezonov. When she returned, she told them about the hermit's holy life and the miracles that took place at his tomb. Some of the older men who heard her confirmed what she said about the miracles, and everyone agreed that John was a holy man. As he listened, Simeon reflected, if he was a holy man, it means that God is here with us. So there's no point in me going off to search for him. And at this thought, his youthful heart burned with the love for God. How remarkable that the query planted by a peddler in the mind of a 4-year-old evidently persisted there to worry Simeon until he reached the age of 19, when it was resolved in a so strange and apparently naive manner. After this, the feeling that he had found faith, Simeon clung to the thought of God, praying much and with tears. He became aware of a change inside himself and felt drawn to the monastic life, and as the starets himself said, looked affectionately on the prince's pretty young daughters without lust, as if they were his sisters, whereas before the sight of them would unsettle him. He even asked his father to let him go to the great monastery at Kiev, but his father said firmly, do your military service first, then you are free to go off. Simeon's unusual frame of mind lasted 3 months. Then he returned to his friendships with the village boys, walking out again with the village girls, drank vodka, and played the concertina, and behaved, in fact, like the other lads in the countryside. That is very relatable. The period of zealousy that Silouan went through, or Simeon went through, I'm sure a lot of us can relate. For me, when I was a catechumen, oh man, like I was like living like a monk, and then time goes by, and then it's like, you go back and the zeal is gone. So very relatable. Young, strong, handsome, and by this time prosperous too, Simeon reveled in life. He was popular in the village, being good-natured, peaceful, and jolly, and the village girls looked on him as a man they would like to marry. He himself was attracted to one of them, and before the question of marriage had been put, what so often happens befell late one summer evening. Next morning, they were working together. His father said to him, quietly, where were you last night, son? My heart was troubled for you. The mild words sank into Simeon's soul, and in later life, when he recalled his father, the starets would say, I have never reached my father's stature. He was absolutely illiterate. He even used to make mistakes in the Lord's Prayer, which he had learned by listening in church, but he was a man who was gentle and wise. They were a large family, mother, father, 5 sons, and 2 daughters, all living in affection together. The elder boys worked with their father. One Friday they were out harvesting, and it was Simeon's turn to cook the midday meal. Forgetting that it was Friday, he prepared a dish of pork for their lunch, and they all ate of it. 6 months later, on the feast day in the winter, Simeon's father turned to him with a gentle smile and said, Son, do you remember how you gave us pork to eat that day in the fields? It was a Friday. I ate it, It tasted like carrion. Why didn't you ever tell me at the time? I didn't want to upset you, son. Recalling such incidents from his life at home, the Starets would add, "That is the sort of Starets I would like to have. He never got angry. He was always even tempered and humble. Just think, he waited 6 months for the right moment to correct me without upsetting me." Wow, think about that. His father, Silouan, describes as a gentle man, and the example of it is that uh, he broke the fast for the family one Friday night, and 6 months later, his father recalls it. Call that, wow, gentle correction. That is something I must grow in, as I tend to instantly correct and scold, and yeah. Ooh, Lord have mercy. Sterat Silouan was enormously strong physically, and from the following facts will testify. And the following facts will testify. Once he was still quite young, prior to his military service, after the hearty Easter meal, in which included a meat course. His mother suggested an omelet. He did not refuse. His brothers had gone off to friends, and his mother fried him a whole panful, and he ate it all. At that time, he and his brothers were working at the estate of Prince Trubetskoy, and on public holidays, he sometimes went to the local tavern, where he might drink up 3 bottles of vodka in a single evening and not get drunk. Wow. On one occasion, when a hard frost had followed on thaw, he was sitting in the inn. One of the patrons who spent the night at the inn wanted to return home, went out to harness his horse, but soon came back saying, "What awful luck! I must go, but can't. There is a thick layer of ice all over the horse's hooves, and the horse is in such pain that it won't let me break the ice off. Simeon said, "Come, I'll help you." And in the stable he took the horse's neck under his arm and said to the peasant, "Go on now, break the ice." The horse stood the whole time without moving. The peasant broke the ice off his hooves, harnessed it, and rode off. So Silouan is putting the horse in a chokehold to hold it. Imagine that. So the other guy could break up the ice on his hooves. This is once again painting an image of Silouan's strength in the world. With his bare hands, Simeon could take the hot cast iron pot of cabbage soup and carry it from the stove to the table, where the Artel were having their dinner. With a blow of his fist, he would smash a fairly thick plank. He could lift heavy weights and had the rare resistance to heat and cold. He would eat much and often, and he was a hard worker. But this physical strength, which was later to stand in him in such good stead in the accomplishment of many exceptional spiritual feats, now led to committing his gravest sin, of which he afterwards so sorely repented. The village was celebrating the feast day of its patron saint. It was in the afternoon that almost all the villagers were out of doors. Simeon was walking down the street with a friend playing his concertina. I don't really know what that is. 2 brothers, the village cobblers, came towards him. The elder, a great burly fellow, much addicted to brawling, was somewhat the worse for drink, and he drew level with Simeon and began to jeer at him, made to snatch his concertina. But Simeon managed to hand the instrument, so it's an instrument, to his friend, and facing the cobbler, tried to persuade him to go on his way. But the cobbler, obviously wanting to show off before the village girls who were laughing, watching the scene, went for Simeon. Here, in the Staret's own words, is what happened next. "At first I thought of giving in to the fellow, but then I was ashamed of how the girls were laughing. laugh at me. So I hit him a blow in the chest, a hard blow in the chest. His body shot away and fell backwards with a heavy thud in the middle of the road. Froth and blood trickled from his mouth. The onlookers were all horrified. So was I. I've killed him, I thought, and stood rooted on the spot. At that time, the cobbler's younger brother picked up a large stone and threw it at me. I twisted round and it got me in the back. I turned to him and said, "You want me to do the same to you?" and moved towards him, but he ran away. For a long time, the cobbler lay for where he was. People ran up to help him, bathing him with cold water. It was over half an hour before he was able to rise on his feet, and with difficulty they got him home, where he was bad for a couple of months, but luckily didn't die. For my part, I had to keep on the lookout for a long while. After dark, at every corner, the cobbler's brothers and their chums would lie in wait for me with cudgels and knives, but God preserved me. Wow. Imagine that. It seems like the Starets, Silouan, addresses his own sin was actually the root of it was vainglory, because he said that he was thinking about giving in and letting him hit him, which would be, in my analysis of the situation, the humble thing to do. But he said he didn't want to. He wanted to impress the girls. He didn't want to look bad in front of the girls, so he hit him, which led to this grave sin. But the root of that sin, in my view here, is vainglory. Thus did the clamor of youth begin to drown the first summons to a monastic life for spiritual thriving. But Simeon, chose of God, was called again, by this time in means of a certain vision, on which followed the period of wild living. He had dozed off and was in a light sleep, when he dreamed that he saw a snake crawl down his throat. Feeling sick with revulsion, he awoke to hear a voice saying, "Just as you found it loathsome to swallow a snake in your dream, I will find your ways ugly to look upon. So will I find your ways ugly to look upon." Simeon saw no one. He only heard the voice. Extraordinarily sweet and beautiful, but for all its gentleness, the effect it had on him was revolutionary. He was convinced beyond doubt that he heard the voice of the Mother of God herself, and to the end of his life he gave thanks to her for coming to lift up him from his degradation. He would say, Now I see how sorry the Lord and his mother are for his people. For people. Imagine the Mother of God appearing from the skies to show a young man like me his sins. So once again, the quote from the Mother of God to him was, "Just as you found it loathsome to swallow a snake in your dream, so I find your ways ugly to look upon." The fact that he had not been deemed worthy of actually seeing the Mother of God, he attributed to the state of impurity that possessed him at the time. This repetition of his original call, occurring not long before his military service, affected the whole course of his future. Renouncing the evil direction his life had taken, which he now began to detest and be ashamed of, he started to repent. His resolve to enter a monastery, once he was released from the army, returned with redoubled force. An acute sense of sin awoke in him, so powerful that it changed his whole outlook on life, affecting not only his own private actions and attitudes, but his extraordinary interesting conversations with other people also. Unfortunately, I am only able to repeat some of these as ones that have remained the most clearly in my memory. One day there was music and dancing in the village. Looking on, Simeon noticed a middle-aged fellow villager playing the concertina and dancing. Drawing him aside, Simeon asked him, How can you play and dance like that, Stepan? Didn't you once kill someone? Stepan had indeed killed a man in a drunken brawl. He pulled Simeon further on one side and replied, "When I was serving my sentence, I prayed and prayed, begging God to forgive me. And he did. That is why I can now play and be happy." Simeon, who not long before had himself nearly caused a man's death, knew that it was to what it was to implore God and obtain forgiveness of sins, so he can understand how his fellow villager, a pardoned murderer, could be at peace. He could have no clearer illustration of the Russian peasant's precise consciousness of sin, his strong feeling of repentance, and his profound religious sense. Another young man from Simeon's village came together with a girl from a neighboring hamlet and got her with child. Seeing how casual was the boy's attitude, Simeon set about persuading him to marry the girl, because it would be sin if he didn't. For a long time the youth would not listen. He did not want to marry the girl, but in the end Simeon convinced him, and he did so. When the starets told me this story, I asked him why he never married the girl he had known. His reply was, "When I wanted to become a monk, I entreated God to arrange things in such a way that I might do so with an easy mind, and God did. While I was away soldering, a corn chancellor came to do business in our When I was away soldiering, a corn chancellor came to do business in our village. Seeing the girl at a village dance and noticing how gay and pretty she was, how well she sang, he fell in love with her. They lived happily together and raised a large family. And the starets was fervently grateful to God for having heard his prayer, but he never forgot his sin." Military service. As Simeon did military service at St. Petersburg, in a Sapier's battalion attached to the Imperial Guard, he went off his regiment filled with living faith and a deep sense of repentance. He never ceased thinking of God. He was very popular in the army, earned a reputation of being a quiet, reliable soldier, and his comrades loved him for an amiable and loyal friend. On the eve of a certain saint's day, Simeon set out with 3 other young guardsmen of his company to spend the evening in town. They went into one of the big, brightly lit taverns of the capital, where a band was playing noisily. Sitting down, they ordered food and drink, and a lively conversation sprang up, in which Simeon, however, took little part. He was so silent that one of his companions turned over him and said, "You're not very chatty, Simeon. A penny for your thoughts." "I'm thinking that here we are sitting in a tavern, eating, drinking vodka, listening to the band, and enjoying ourselves. Well, in this very hour on Mount Athos, there is a church for Vespers and will be prayer all night. And I'm wondering which of us will put up the best defense before God's judgment seat, them or us." Wow, what a thought. Simeon's friend exclaimed, "What a fellow Simeon is! We sit listening to music, enjoying ourselves, while he is on Mount Athos and at the last judgment." Wow. The guardsman's suggestion that Simeon was on Mount Athos in last judgment was true, not only of that particular moment when they were sitting in the tavern, but the whole period of his military service. That he did think about Mount Athos is shown by the fact that several times he sent money there. One day he went from the Ustis-Sorki camp, where his battalion was stationed in the summer, to post office in the village of Kolpino, in order to transfer some money on Athos. On that day, on the way back, Still quite close to Colpino, he met a huge mad dog tearing towards him. When the dog had gotten quite close and was preparing to lunge for him, in his panic he cried out, "Lord have mercy!" Hardly had he pronounced this brief prayer when some power or other jerked the dog to one side, as if it had run into something. Avoiding Simeon, it ran back to the village, where it did much harm to people and cattle. This incident made a deep impression on Simeon. He felt a lively sense of God looking after us and clung even more tightly to his constant awareness of Him. There is another instance of effectiveness of his influence and good counsel in the course of the military service. One day in the company's quarters, he came across a soldier due for discharge who was sitting gloomily on his pallet. Simeon went up to him and said, "What is the matter? Why do you sit there with your head on your hands instead of being glad like everyone else that you've done your time and then you're off home?" "I've just had a letter from home," was the soldier's reply. "They write that my wife has a child while I was away." He was silent for a space, shaking his head. Then, in a low voice, in which grief mingled with anger and injured pride, he muttered, "I'm scared of what I shall do to her. That is why I don't want to go home." "And you?" Simeon asked him quietly. "Since you left home, how many times have you been in the house down the street?" "Well," said the soldier, as if he were just remembering, "there had been many times. You see, you couldn't wait. Do you think it would be easy for her? All the right for you. You're a man. But once is enough to get her in trouble. Remember what you've done. You're more in the wrong than she is. Forgive her. Go home and accept the child as your own, and you'll see everything will be all right." A few months later, Simeon received a grateful letter from the soldier telling him how he had appreciated his home, approached his home, and his father and mother came out to meet him uneasy, while his wife, apprehensive and nervous, waited at the door with the child in her arms. Since Simeon had talked to him at the barracks, he had felt quite all right. He greeted his parents happily and cheerily went up to his wife, took the child, and kissed it too. They all went indoors together, and after that walked around the village, visiting relations and friends. And wherever they went, they carried the child in his arms, and everything was very pleasant. And since then, they had all lived contentedly together. In his letter, the soldier thanked his friend for his good service, and there was no denying that the advice was not only good, but wise too. So we see that even as a young man, Simeon realized that the essential condition for harmony amongst people is that they should recognize his own shortcomings. At the end of his military service, not long before his contemporaries were due to be demobilized, Simeon and the company scribe set off together to see Father John of Kronstadt to ask for his prayers and blessing. Not finding him at Kronstadt, they decided to leave a letter. The scribe wrote out his best hand and had learned an epistle full of flourishes. Simeon produced these few words: "Batushka, I want to become a monk. Pray that the world does not hold me back." They returned to their barracks in St. Petersburg, and on the very next day, Simeon began to feel, in his own words, the flames of hell roaring around him. He went home, but stayed only a week, while the villagers made haste to collect linen and other gifts for him to take to the monastery. Then he said goodbye to everyone and set off for Mount Athos. But from the very day that Father John Kronstadt had prayed for him, the flames of hell roared about him, unceasing, wherever they happened to be, on a train, at Odessa, on a boat, and even on Mount Athos, in the monastery, in the church, everywhere. And that is chapter 1 of Saint Silouan the Athonite.